All right. Hello, everyone. This is Live Beyond Well. We're here to learn and talk about how to live better in every way, mind, body, and spirit. The purpose of this podcast is to give you the tools that you can immediately use to help yourself or others around you. I'm Dr. Corey Howard, a medical doctor with specialization and board certification in internal medicine, gastroenterology, anti-aging, functional, and regenerative medicine, with additional fellowship training in metabolic nutritional medicine. I use all of this and my almost 30 years of experience in my active integrative practice to help guide you to live beyond well. I'm honored that you're taking the time to improve your life, so let's get started. All right, we are ready to roll. Well, today we're going to talk about a very difficult, complex topic that I hope we make it a little bit easier because I don't want to bore myself to death. So we're going to talk about nutrition and really a lot of different aspects of nutrition, including how you eat, what you eat, why you eat, how you can improve that. Do you need medication to help you or not help you? There's such a huge amount of information out there. I think it's important that at some point in time, we go through just the basics. So we're going to go through what are called macronutrients, kind of the big topic, micronutrients, the smaller topic, and then some of the other things that are part of a diet, which includes trace elements or minerals that are found in the environment that actually help all these things work. And we'll explain at least some of it along the way. If you're looking for a very detailed analysis that's scientific, there are so many books that you could pick up, but most days nobody's reading a book, so you want to go online. And if you go online, use whatever AI source you'd like. That'll be a very, very good way to understand some of this stuff. I'll try not to use too many very big words because I really don't know that many, so it doesn't really matter. All right, carbohydrates. Proteins, fats, and carbohydrates are called macronutrients. These are just very big parts of your diet that get broken down into pretty much everything you need, right? So when we talk about those things, there are different areas that you probably should understand. But here's the interesting thing. When we're talking about energy systems in your body, like why do you eat? Because some people eat to live, some people live to eat. And you wonder why. Well, food has a social aspect to it, but it also fuels the body. And in order for the body to be fueled, it has to take the things that you eat and turn them into something that your body can use. Well, just so you know, big word coming up, ATP, right? That's what it is. That is an energy source. Where is it made? It's made in the little nuclear power plant of all of your cells called the mitochondria. I will repeat that word many times because that is really the essence of how all of your systems are going to work and make energy by themselves. And here's the interesting part of it. Protein, fats, and carbohydrates all enter into that system, and they make ATP or energy. But they all make it in a different kind of way in terms of how many grams come out for each one. Fats much more than proteins and carbohydrates, but they can be utilized. And that's why there's all these crazy diets, whether you have a high carbohydrate diet, a low carbohydrate diet, a high fat diet, a low fat diet, high protein diet, low protein diets. And I don't know how anybody figures it out because it's so confusing. It's really mind-boggling. I don't even know what to tell my kids sometimes. So carbohydrates. Carbohydrates come in a few different types. You've got simple carbohydrates, and you can guess what that is. Just use the word sugar, and that's going to be simple carbohydrates. That's cookies, cakes, candies, breads, pasta, all the things that you really don't want to be eating on a regular basis, but that we all love. And we all love them because they also release some dopamine, which doesn't make you dopey, but it actually makes you feel good. And so dopamine is actually a reason why some medications and actually some drugs actually increase the amount of dopamine and they make you feel good. But food does the same thing, and that's why food's addicting because it causes this release. And so protein, fats, and carbohydrates all do that, especially carbs, especially simple carbs in the terms of sugar. So that's one aspect of it that is important. But then you might ask, well, are all carbs bad? Well, that's a valid question, right? I mean, carbs, good and bad, because I like to have some dessert too sometimes, but just not every day. Although I'd like to, but I can't. but neither can you, by the way. But what basically we're looking at, though, is complex carbs. So complex carbs are going to be in foods like potatoes, grains, especially whole grains, where you still have the outer portion that has a lot of fiber, and also some proteins. And those are basically molecules of glucose that are all kind of together in different forms. And what happens is those complex carbs, they get broken down over time so that you wind up having more sustainable energy. So let's say that you're going to run a 5K. Well, you don't load up with a bunch of complex carbohydrates because the race will be over before your body can even process them. That's generally why you would eat something at least 2 hours before you start. But you can have a sports drink with sugar in it because you're going to burn through it. And if you're, fast, you're going to get through it in a pretty short period of time. But you would do that if you're doing some more long distance stuff. So say you're running, 5 miles, 10 miles, or half marathon, even a marathon, or doing a half Ironman or an Ironman, which are longer races, then you really want to load up in a different way. And we'll get into carb loading at another time. Here's the thing about a protein, which is very, very cool. So a little bit of basic science on this. Your body basically has a cell, and inside the cell is a system that's going to make the protein. And what happens is your DNA, which is basically like your blueprint, it is read in a certain way in a few different organelles, which are parts of the cell, and it reads it. And it says, this amino acid, that one. But to make it simple, they're positive, negative, and neutral, basically. Even though there are 20 of them, they're either positive, negative, or neutral. And the body just puts them together into this long chain, which actually then folds up on itself into a three-dimensional structure with the positives and negatives on the inside, and that's a protein. And then those things do a lot of they have a lot of different functions in the body, put it that way. And so proteins happen to be a little bit larger. In order for them to get utilized, they have to be broken down a little bit more in a complex kind of way. And so what are proteins for? Proteins are in your muscles. They're actually part of even bone structures. They're part of enzymes, which are these things that make your chemical reactions go. If you remember, I may have said, or if you watched the last episode, there are hundreds of billions of chemical reactions occurring in the human body per second. That is mind-boggling by itself. But they're all run by these things called enzymes, and these are actually from proteins as well. It's not the whole story yet, but it's part of the story. They're involved in your immune response. They're obviously involved in movement and all kinds of stuff like that. And so where do these proteins come from? Well, number one source is you're going to think of animal products, right? So all animal products, and under animal, I'm including all animals, and that's fish and everything. And so, whether it's land or sea or something that's flying, those are all going to be an animal-based protein source. The difference is you may have heard of a topic which is complete versus incomplete proteins. That's something that we wrote down and as a potential question. A complete protein is basically all animal proteins are complete. That just means they contain the 20 amino acids that your body needs, especially the 9 that your body can't make. So there are actually 9 of the 20 that no matter what, your body can't make them. It makes the other 11. And so you have to get them in your diet. It just turns out with plant-based proteins, which are similar, and I'm going to talk about that in a second, they can be incomplete, which just means you got to eat some other foods. So this may make you think, well, that kind of sounds like the Mediterranean diet, right? Why is the Mediterranean diet a thing? First of all, the Mediterranean diet isn't a diet. Sorry to break anybody's bubble there. It's actually a lifestyle in the Mediterranean. We bring it into the United States because of certain food groups, but it has to be kind of added to the exercise and the lifestyle that they have, including, afternoons where they may take a break from work and stuff. It's just a little bit different in terms of lifestyle. But the basis of it is they eat a lot of different kinds of foods because no one of them have everything in it. So you've got to be able to have a variety to form these complete proteins and get the rest of whatever you need. Now, plant-based proteins may have a few amino acids, but they may be missing some. versus eating a couple of different plant-based sources gives you everything that you need. And so it's not difficult to do. You just have to be more mindful on how you eat when you actually are eating a more plant-based kind of lifestyle. The interesting thing is, and I've talked to experts around the world about this, is that supposedly the amino acids are absorbed or brought into your body just exactly the same way with animals and plants. Yeah, I gotta say, I'm not so sure if that's the case in a clinical setting. I think in a lab it works, but in the clinical setting, there are definitely people that just don't do well with a plant-based diet for some reason. Either they don't feel right, they just feel like they can't get enough, or they just have some subjective feelings of weakness because they feel like they're not growing their muscles. I say subjective because there's no data that proves that your muscles won't grow with those plant-based proteins, but people get that feeling. So there might be other factors that are probably beyond what we can really discuss today. All right, now we're going to talk about some fats. And the reason why I'm going to talk about fats is because there's a big controversy on the different kinds of fats. Everybody says, you should have certain kinds of fats, and that's true. Your body actually requires a few in terms of your body won't make it. And so those are essential fatty acids, just like essential amino acids. But you've got saturated and unsaturated as two major categories. And if it ever says saturated, that's bad. Those are the kind that cause all kinds of problems for the human body. They are highly inflammatory. And at the end of the day, the word inflammation is the thing that causes almost all of our problems. It causes arthritis, it causes cancer, it causes pretty much everything that goes wrong with the human body can be linked somehow to inflammation. For example, obesity, or just overweight, or having too much body fat in general is highly inflammatory. And there's some evidence that in many of those individuals, they're prone to other diseases like cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and things like that. And so those are inflammatory processes too that can have a genetic component for those that are watching that think that. And that genetic component could be pushed in one direction or another based on how much body fat there is too. So that's interesting. So saturated fat and unsaturated fat, saturated fats basically have to do with the chemical structure. And that has to do with the connection between each of the molecules and whether or not it has a single or what's called a double bond to it. Double bonds are the unsaturated ones, meaning they just have extra space for things to happen. But then you have monounsaturated and polyunsaturated, and both of those are okay. So different kinds of oils, such as, olive oil, say, for example, has omega-3 fatty acids, also has omega-6. Those tend to be mostly unsaturated fats. Nuts and seeds, unsaturated fats, small amount. But foods that are processed, those are going to have a lot of saturated fats. And those saturated fats, they wind up causing an increase or proliferation of a particular kind of fat that's not good for you, and that's called brown fat. And that brown fat's the stuff around the organs. So it's not the stuff that you see when you stand, it's the stuff on the inside. And that's resistant to insulin, which is a substance made in the pancreas that helps you regulate glucose. And so that's where that's important. Trans fats actually occurs through the cooking process. And that is also a toxic kind of fat that can occur. So some people around the world who are vegetarian, they actually take their foods and they fry them. And they think, well, I'm a vegetarian, so I'm going to fry my foods. But actually, that causes more problems than if you didn't eat it at all, if you ate some other products, because those cooking processes in the frying causes this hydrogenation and results in saturated and trans fats or hydrogenated fats, which are very, very dangerous. Increase the risk of cardiovascular disease and diabetes and things like that, and can just make you overweight because of the number of calories that are contained in them. More than 2 to 2.5 times the number of calories per gram of fat than versus gram of protein or carbohydrates. And so you want to avoid it whenever possible. I'm not the kind of I'm going to sit in my ivory tower and tell you, do these things, and you'll see me out eating some chicken wings or something. But the reality is that you try to limit that as much as possible, and also try to make sure that you have something that can offset some of the negative effects of some of those foods, such as salads and vegetables and other products like that, because you've got to offset it somehow. Now, it's not saying that you can never do it. I mean, if you never do it, and there are definitely purists out there that would be like, hey, you know what? Never do this and never do that. Yeah, I mean, that's fine. It's just the problem is if that was the way to go, everybody would be doing it, because it's hard to do that. But it is the healthiest way to go. So avoiding all fried foods would be optimal in that situation, but unfortunately, not always the case. In terms of fats, fats are an energy source. And so that leads us to, when you're exercising, what is the role of protein, fats, and carbohydrates? It turns out that in aerobic exercise, which is like you're just going along and you're not redlining, your body's actually primarily using fat as a fuel source. And in order to burn the fat, you need carbohydrates. So low carbohydrate diets in athletes that do endurance sports makes it a little difficult to optimally burn the fat. So the furnace that burns the fat is run by carbohydrates. And that helps you reach the efficient way of burning the fats without getting into other of the science. But you continue to use more fat than carbohydrates until you get closer and closer to what your optimal or maximum is, which sometimes is called VO2 max. And then when that happens, then you start to use carbohydrates as the fuel source. And when that happens, which is coming out of your muscles primarily and your liver secondarily, you have a very limited amount. So I like to say, basically, we all have enough fat to walk from here to California. Of course, I'm in Florida. So if you're in California listening to this, then back to Florida. But you only have enough carbohydrates to get out of your city. So not very much. So you have to know how your body regulates those. And that's really important, especially in endurance sports. And you learn that through experience. So let's switch to some of the vitamins that your body needs, because you make some, but you also need to get some in. So there are fat-soluble vitamins, which are A, D, E, and K. Vitamins A, D, E, and K are the most common ones. And then the water-soluble are going to be pretty much everything else, including the C vitamins and all the different kinds of B vitamins. In a nutshell, B vitamins are very important in that energy system. So remember, I'm talking about that mitochondria again. I keep using that word because I think it's underutilized in clinical medicine. I think people like to understand why they would do certain things. I'm not saying everybody does, but very frequently when you explain something to people and you help them understand why they might want to do something, it makes it more palatable to them and more interesting to them to actually go ahead and do it in their diet and or exercise routines. And so B vitamins are very important in running that machine. And that mitochondria actually requires 21 different nutrients in order just to make your energy, or back to the ATP model. So you got vitamin A. Vitamin A, a lot of people think of as vision, which is very important there. And actually, there's a lot of crossover in a lot of these. Vitamin D, people think of the bone and bone growth, but actually it's also involved in hair and nails. It's also involved in your immune system. Vitamin E is an antioxidant, which is basically a substance that helps to block the negative effects of things in your environment, including exercise, which forms a lot of oxidation. You can think of that as a like a little battery that do not do this. But if you had a little battery inside of your blood vessels, and occasionally it would touch both sides and cause a little bit of a spark or damage, that damage is like what oxidation does. And so as you exercise, you build these, you form these. And so you need antioxidants to help to mop them up, so to speak. And that's where you get in your diet, and also sometimes with supplementation that you might take. Vitamin K, which really is a very complex kind of vitamin, is used to help your body clot. And so there are people that actually have problems with clotting that wind up having issues with vitamin K. And then we get into all the B vitamins, and we've got a whole list of them: thiamine, riboflavin, niacin, and B5, B6. They all have different functions, and again, if that's a topic that we really want to dive into, we can spend an entire session just on B vitamins. But here's the thing: they can easily be tested, and so we can tell whether or not you have enough or you need some more. A lot of people do a shotgun approach. They're like, oh, I read I should take this for my nails, or I should take that. And it turns out that some of those things, if you take too much, they can block your body's natural absorption of food products. And so, there's kind of a happy balance on that. So in terms of hype about vitamins, if you were to own a vitamin store, you want to sell a lot of vitamins because they're good. But that doesn't mean that they're good for you. So I like to use a scientific approach in figuring out what you might need. And there are some very good tests that check out these micronutrients in order for us to dial in what you might need. Now, then you might say, well, do you use that to sell supplements? And the answer is yes and no. The first thing I would do is look at what food sources we can incorporate back into your diet in order to get some of these vitamins. Or if we find that either you can't or you won't, which is often sometimes the case, then we would recommend certain supplements. I don't like to take all of these at once. There are literally times where I have people coming to my practice that are on 25 or 30 different supplements from a variety of different people. And the first thing we do is just go one by one and say, what is this for? What are you using it for? What do you think it's for? Because sometimes they just don't know. They may have read it online, or one of their friends said, oh, you should try whatever, or I saw it on a TV show or heard it on a podcast, that they want to take a specific thing, and that doesn't mean that's going to work for you. Kind of in a nutshell, trace elements are going to be like iron, zinc, magnesium, manganese, molybdenum, which you're like, what? Yes, molybdenum is involved in only a few chemical reactions in the body, but very, very important. You say, well, I have knives with molybdenum. Yeah, you do, but you're not getting any from that. But two big ones that I do want to kind of harp on right now is iodine and selenium. And the reason I want to do that is because these days we have focused so much on getting salt out of our diets because it's risks to your blood vessels, the risk to blood pressure, especially as we get older, and what the negative effects of salt could be. So a lot of people have either decreased or eliminated salt from their diet. And if they use salt, they use, like a kind of a fancy schmancy salt, like Himalayan salt or sea salt. Well, the problem is that those don't contain iodine. And iodine is an essential element that's only found in saltwater fish and seaweed. And we don't eat a lot of either of those a lot of times. I mean, you just said you don't eat fish at all, so you'd have a low iodine diet. And what that does is it affects your thyroid. So the thyroid gland actually is something that requires those in order to make thyroid hormone. And that turns out to be a process called subclinical hypothyroidism, which is basically a nutritional disease, not a thyroid disease. Unfortunately, you go to a doctor, you're feeling fatigued, they check your thyroid, they put you on thyroid medicine without checking an iodine level. And I think that's something that we should be checking. You can also check selenium, but I usually just give it because it's cheap and it's effective, and it's something that you can start and stop as we're trying to define what a thyroid issue might be. And interestingly, it also is related to hair loss. So hypothyroidism, a low thyroid, is related to hair loss, which is why some of the products that are being sold today have incorporated iodine and selenium, and all of a sudden your hair is growing. You think it's from everything else in there, but a lot of it's from the iodine and selenium as a part of it. And there's other parts, such as you may have heard of biotin, which helps hair and nails and things like that. But those are the two that I think are very important. Now, what do these do? Now, they act as what's called a cofactor in these enzymatic reactions. You're like, whoa, I don't even know what you just said. So basically, in order to go from A to B, you need a vehicle to start that process. In order to start that enzyme from working, the key, the ignition, is a trace element. And those trace elements get in there, they start it up. So all of those have to be present in quantities enough to support your particular lifestyle. If you're kind of sedentary, or you're not really haven't made a commitment to exercise on a regular basis, you may need less. If you exercise heavily, you may need more. So again, nutrition becomes something that is very, very individualized. So I want to circle back for a second, because I think it's important to kind of go through what we just said in order to figure out what kind of diet you might want to consume after this, right? And so, you got protein, fats, and carbohydrates. They're the major energy sources for your body. They require trace elements and minerals in order to help them get into your cells and work. And they provide all the rest of the functions that you have. And because of that, it is the main reason why you want to try to eat a variety of different kinds of foods in your diet. So if you were to go to a deli counter, say a good deli counter, and get something that was fermented, which we haven't even talked about the importance of fermented foods, and something that was maybe cooked, maybe a piece of salmon or something like that, some beans, some greens, and other things like that, and you combine smaller amounts of those, you will have a feeling of fullness more than if you just ate a big hunk of something. Now, that might be the case for many people, but for your body, it gives it the best chance possible to give you the energy that you need throughout the day and to support your functions, including your brain function. In addition to all of that stuff, right? Because we got to kind of go into what is meal planning, because that becomes the most difficult thing. We have busy lives. Nobody wants to go home and chop, cook, clean, and somewhere in between that's eating. Now, there are many, many diets out there, and I've said that the best diet is the one that you're going to follow, because that's just the truth. But the reality is that all these things come out, whether or not you should be on this or that. The problem with fad diets is that they come and go, and they may not be perfect for you. So you have to find what works best for you in terms of the amounts of protein, fats, and carbohydrates. And as a general rule, I would say this: protein, 0.6 grams per pound of your ideal body weight. That's your ideal body weight. So if you're 10 pounds overweight, calculate it on the lower body weight. Carbohydrates, I would start at 30% or so and work your way up to as much as 50%, depending on the kinds of exercise that you do and how your body processes. Interestingly, in my life, my wife, she's a carb hound. She never gains a pound. I have no idea how, but that there are people like that that can eat either a lot of foods or different kinds of foods that if you ate the same way, you wouldn't look the same. And then the rest are in fats and healthy fats. So as an example, 1 ounce of olive oil contains 170 calories. So that's quite a bit when you're looking at that. If a handful of nuts, say 1 ounce of nuts, is about the same. So you have to kind of figure out how to do that. And that's very, very individualized for you and can help you overall. What you want to do is have a balance of these different products. You want to make sure that you get tested to define what you really need. And then after that, batch cook, find some cool recipes. Love to hear some of those online. And I think that's pretty much it for nutrition.